Unit 731 represents a chilling and deeply disturbing chapter in the history of World War II. It stands as a stark reminder of the depths of human depravity that can manifest during conflict. This unit's existence highlights the morally ambiguous choices made in the pursuit of power and military advantage. It was identified as a clandestine Japanese military unit. Its operations were shrouded in secrecy and conducted far from public view. The unit was primarily based in the occupied territory of Manchuria in northeastern China. Here, under the guise of medical research, Unit 731 conducted horrific experiments. These were not standard scientific inquiries, but rather systematic atrocities. The unit's activities were a profound violation of medical ethics and basic human rights. The experiments carried out by Unit 731 were conducted on a specific population. Their victims were primarily prisoners of war. These individuals were stripped of their rights and dignity. A vast majority of the victims were Chinese civilians. They were rounded up and brought to the unit's facilities. Their lives were deemed expendable for the sake of military research. The victim pool also included Allied soldiers. Prisoners from various nations captured by the Japanese military were subjected to these procedures. This included individuals from the United States, Britain, and other Allied countries. The atrocities committed within Unit 731 are gruesome and difficult to comprehend. The scale and nature of the suffering inflicted are almost unimaginable. It represents a level of cruelty that shocks the conscience. Victims were subjected to a litany of torturous procedures. These were designed not to heal or understand disease for treatment, but to study the effects of various traumas and pathogens on the human body. The suffering was deliberate and extreme. Among the most horrific practices, vivisections were commonplace within Unit 731. These were not post-mortem examinations. Vivisections involved the dissection of living individuals. These procedures were often performed without anesthesia. Researchers would surgically explore organs and systems in conscious subjects. The goal was to observe the effects of disease or injury in real time. Experiments also extensively studied the effects of frostbite. Soldiers needed to understand how to combat cold injuries in harsh climates. Unit 731 used human subjects for this research. Frostbite tests involved forced exposure of limbs to freezing temperatures. Prisoners' arms or legs would be left outside in extreme cold. They would then be thawed to study the resulting damage and potential treatments. Deadly pathogens were weaponized and tested on humans. Unit 731 was a center for biological warfare research. They sought to develop and deploy diseases as weapons. The plague, one of history's most devastating diseases, was weaponized and tested. Unit scientists cultivated plague bacteria. They then experimented with methods of infecting populations. Pathogen testing resulted in widespread suffering and death, not only among the test subjects but also in surrounding civilian populations. Unit 731 conducted field tests that released infected materials. Forced infections were inflicted upon prisoners systematically. Individuals were deliberately exposed to deadly diseases. This was done to study the progression of illness and the effectiveness of pathogens. Diseases used included anthrax, a highly lethal bacterial infection. Prisoners were infected to observe the symptoms and mortality rates. This provided data for potential biological attacks. Typhus, a devastating disease spread by lice, was also used. Subjects were infected to study its effects on the human body. The unit sought to understand how these diseases could be spread and maximized for military use. All these experiments were conducted under the watchful eye of military supervisors. The research was sanctioned and directed by the highest levels of the Japanese military command. Scientists and doctors worked in concert with military objectives. Perhaps the most shocking aspect of the Unit 731 story lies in the aftermath of the war. As Japan faced defeat, the unit attempted to destroy evidence of its activities. However, much of the research data survived. Following Japan's surrender, many scientists involved in Unit 731 were apprehended. They were responsible for unimaginable crimes against humanity. Justice seemed imminent for the victims and their families. However, a controversial decision was made by the United States. Many scientists involved were granted immunity from war crimes prosecution. This decision was not made lightly but was based on strategic considerations. Immunity was granted in exchange for their data. The results of their horrific experiments were deemed valuable. The scientific knowledge gained through torture was prioritized over accountability. The U.S. government effectively shielded these war criminals from prosecution. While other Japanese officials faced trials for atrocities, the Unit 731 personnel largely escaped justice. This created a deep sense of injustice for the victims. The rationale behind this decision was the pursuit of a strategic advantage. Specifically, the United States sought to advance its own biological warfare program. Access to Unit 731's research was seen as a shortcut. The U.S. sought access to the scientific knowledge derived from Unit 731's research. This included information on the effects of various pathogens on humans. It also covered methods for cultivating and deploying biological agents. The cover-up went even further. Some Unit 731 scientists were even employed by the U.S. government or related institutions. Their expertise, gained through unethical means, was utilized. This exchange of immunity for data meant that the full truth of Unit 731's activities was suppressed for years. The victims' stories were often ignored or disbelieved. The perpetrators were allowed to live freely, some continuing scientific careers. The decision remains a point of significant historical debate and ethical concern. It highlights the complex and often morally compromised choices made during the Cold War era. The pursuit of military dominance overshadowed the demand for justice. The data obtained from Unit 731 was classified by the U.S. government. Its existence and the deal made with the scientists were kept secret for decades. This secrecy contributed to the unit being a forgotten horror for many. Survivors and their families struggled to gain recognition for the crimes committed. The lack of public trials meant that the full scope of the atrocities was not widely known. This compounded the suffering of those affected. The immunity deal also complicated Japan's reckoning with its wartime past. Without trials, there was no official international legal condemnation of Unit 731's specific actions. This made it harder for Japan to confront this particular history. The scientific community also grappled with the ethics of using data obtained through torture. While some argued the data was valuable, others condemned its source. The debate continues regarding the use of such ethically compromised research. The legacy of Unit 731 is one of profound human suffering and a disturbing post-war compromise. It serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the ethical dilemmas of war. The victims deserve to be remembered and their stories told. The unit's activities were a clear violation of international law and norms of warfare. Even by the standards of the time, the experiments were considered barbaric. The post-war immunity granted to the perpetrators remains controversial. Historians and researchers continue to uncover details about Unit 731. Access to archives and survivor testimonies helps piece together the full picture. The scale of the operation and its impact are becoming clearer over time. The unit's main facility in Pingfeng, China, is now a museum. It serves as a memorial to the victims and a reminder of the atrocities committed there. It stands as a testament to the importance of remembering this history. Understanding Unit 731 is crucial for understanding the full scope of World War II. It reveals the extent to which some nations pursued military advantage. It also shows the complex and often uncomfortable choices made by the victors. The story of Unit 731 is not just a historical account of wartime atrocities. It is also a story about accountability, justice, and the ethics of science. It forces us to confront difficult questions about human nature and the consequences of war. The victims of Unit 731 came from diverse backgrounds but shared a common fate. They were subjected to unimaginable cruelty in the name of military research. Their suffering should not be forgotten. The scientists involved were highly educated individuals. Their participation highlights how scientific knowledge can be perverted for destructive purposes. It underscores the importance of ethical guidelines in research. The post-war immunity deal had long-lasting consequences. It allowed perpetrators to escape justice and hindered the process of historical reconciliation. It prioritized national security interests over human rights. The pursuit of biological weapons was a major concern during the Cold War. The U.S. decision regarding Unit 731 was driven by this fear. It reflects the intense pressure to gain any perceived advantage. The data obtained from Unit 731 was reportedly used in U.S. biological warfare research. This raises serious ethical questions about complicity. It links the atrocities directly to post-war scientific development. The full extent of how Unit 731's data was used is still debated by historians. However, the fact that it was sought and acquired in exchange for immunity is undisputed. This exchange is a central part of the unit's legacy. Remembering Unit 731 is essential for students of history and ethics. It provides a stark example of the consequences of dehumanization. It shows what can happen when scientific inquiry is divorced from moral responsibility. The story serves as a warning against the dangers of military secrecy and unchecked power. It emphasizes the need for transparency and accountability, even in times of conflict. The victims deserve to have their stories told and remembered. The legacy of Unit 731 continues to impact international relations and historical memory. It is a painful reminder of the atrocities of war and the compromises made in its aftermath. Learning from this history is vital for the future. The unit's activities were a crime against humanity. The failure to prosecute many of the perpetrators remains a controversial aspect of post-war justice. The victims and their suffering should be at the forefront of our understanding. Unit 731 stands as a symbol of the worst excesses of wartime research. Its history is a somber lesson in the ethical responsibilities of scientists and governments. We must remember this forgotten horror to prevent its recurrence. Our story begins with a name whispered in the shadows: Project Azorian. This was no ordinary undertaking. It was a clandestine operation, born in the depths of the Cold War. Its architect was the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, an organization synonymous with covert action. They conceived of a plan so audacious, it seemed pulled from a spy novel. The year was 1974, a time of intense global tension, when this ambitious project was set into motion. The world was a chessboard, and this move was designed to be decisive. Despite the passage of decades, Project Azorian remains shrouded in secrecy. Much of what happened is still classified, hidden from public view. This veil of secrecy has naturally fueled countless conspiracy theories. People wonder what truly happened, what secrets are still being kept. The official story presented by the US government offered a clear purpose. It described a mission driven by the need for vital intelligence. The stated goal was straightforward, if incredibly difficult: recover a sunken Soviet submarine. This vessel lay lost somewhere on the vast ocean floor. The specific location was the deep Pacific Ocean. The submarine had vanished far from shore, sinking into crushing depths. The official reason given for this monumental effort was intelligence gathering. The US wanted to learn about Soviet naval technology and capabilities. Achieving this goal required an engineering marvel. It involved the construction of a massive, highly specialized ship. This vessel was christened the Glomar Explorer. It was built by Howard Hughes's Summa Corporation, adding another layer of intrigue. The Glomar Explorer was given a clever disguise. It was publicly presented as a deep-sea mining vessel, searching for manganese nodules. This cover story was crucial to the operation's success. It allowed the ship to operate openly in international waters without raising suspicion. The ship's true design was revolutionary. It was built with a massive claw-like mechanism, intended to secretly retrieve the sunken submarine from the seabed. While the official narrative provides a framework, many believe it is incomplete. They argue it doesn't tell the whole story. The conspiracy theory surrounding Project Azorian paints a much darker picture. It suggests the US had far more sinister motives. This theory posits that the US sought more than just general intelligence. They were after something specific, something potentially devastating. The theory suggests the US was primarily interested in recovering nuclear weapons. The sunken Soviet submarine was believed to carry them. It also posits the US was after advanced Soviet technology. The submarine represented the cutting edge of Soviet naval engineering at the time. It was widely believed that the recovered submarine held highly sensitive materials. These materials were the true prize of the operation. These sensitive materials potentially included intact nuclear warheads. Recovering these would provide invaluable insights into Soviet nuclear capabilities. They also potentially included cutting-edge Soviet technology. This could range from propulsion systems to communication arrays and code-breaking equipment. According to the theory, the US desperately wanted to analyze this technology. Understanding it could shift the balance of power in the Cold War. Beyond the core theories, additional intrigue and rumors swirled around Azorian. These added to the operation's mystique and fear. There was a strong belief that the bodies of Soviet sailors were recovered. These were the crew members who went down with the submarine. Rumors persisted that these bodies were secretly buried at sea. This was allegedly done to maintain secrecy and avoid diplomatic complications. The potential recovery of bodies led to rumors of contaminated cargo. Was the submarine carrying something dangerous besides weapons? This, in turn, led to rumors of potential radioactive leaks. A sunken nuclear submarine always carries the risk of radiation release. These rumors, whether true or not, amplified the operation's clandestine nature. They highlighted how far the CIA was willing to go. They also highlighted the potential risks involved in such a recovery. It wasn't just about technology. It was about dangerous materials and human remains. From its inception, Project Azorian was surrounded by intense secrecy. It was one of the most tightly guarded secrets of the Cold War. Very limited information was available to the public for years. The operation unfolded largely unnoticed by the world. This extreme secrecy naturally amplified speculations. The less people knew, the more they wondered and theorized. The public remained largely unaware of the project's true nature for years. The Glomar Explorer's mining cover held firm for a time. However, investigative journalists began uncovering the truth. They started asking questions about the mysterious ship and its activities. Revelations were slowly pieced together from declassified documents. Bits of information emerged as government files were opened. Further revelations came from leaked information. Whistleblowers or insiders provided crucial details that confirmed the project's existence and purpose. These revelations, while confirming the operation, only deepened the mystery. They raised more questions than they answered about what was truly recovered. Today, decades later, still classified files related to Project Azorian exist. The full story remains locked away in government vaults. These classified files continue to fuel ongoing theories. What secrets do they hold? What was the true outcome of the mission? One persistent theory suggests Azorian was part of a larger, darker Cold War operation. It might have been connected to other covert activities. The true extent of the mission objectives remains unknown. Was it solely about intelligence, or were there other, more ambitious goals? The potential dangers involved also remain unknown. How close did the operation come to disaster, either politically or physically? The ultimate fate of the recovered materials remains unknown. What happened to the sections of the submarine, the technology, or potentially the weapons? Project Azorian leaves behind a legacy of unanswered questions. It is a puzzle with many missing pieces. It stands as a chilling reminder of the covert battles fought during the Cold War. Operations like this shaped history in ways we may never fully understand. Operation Sea Spray represents a chilling chapter in the history of the United States. It unveils a disturbing truth about certain past actions undertaken by the government. This controversial event took place in the year 1950. It was conducted under the direction of the United States Navy. The operation secretly subjected the unsuspecting citizens of San Francisco to a biological experiment. This was done without their knowledge or consent. The experiment involved the deliberate release of a specific type of bacteria. The bacteria used was known scientifically as Serratia marcescens. These bacteria were released directly into the air over the city. This dispersal occurred across a wide area of San Francisco. It was carried out without informing or seeking permission from any of the residents. The stated intention was ostensibly to simulate a biological attack scenario. The primary goal of this covert operation was to study the potential spread patterns of a bioweapon. Researchers wanted to understand how airborne pathogens might disperse over a dense urban environment. They sought data on how far and wide such agents could travel. The rationale behind Operation Sea Spray was deeply rooted in the anxieties of the Cold War era. The United States government harbored significant fears during this period. They were particularly concerned about the possibility of a biological attack. A specific and major fear was the potential for an attack originating from the Soviet Union. The geopolitical tensions were extremely high. This fear drove various defense-related research initiatives. The government sought to gain critical understanding regarding bioweapon behavior. They needed to know how such agents would perform and spread within complex urban environments. This knowledge was deemed essential for defense planning. San Francisco was ultimately chosen as the specific test subject city for this experiment. Its selection was based on several key factors. One significant factor was its unique geographical layout. The city's peninsula structure and prevailing winds were considered advantageous for tracking dispersal. Another crucial factor in its selection was its relatively high population density. This density provided a realistic simulation environment for studying spread among people. The Navy believed San Francisco offered an ideal natural laboratory. They could observe how airborne particles behaved over varied terrain and populated areas. This was seen as crucial data for national security. Researchers meticulously planned the release points and timing. They aimed to maximize the coverage area while minimizing immediate suspicion. The operation was designed to be as covert as possible. The Serratia marcescens bacteria was chosen for specific reasons. It was believed at the time to be non-pathogenic or minimally harmful to humans. Its red pigment also made it easy to track its dispersal patterns. This tracking was done using collection plates placed throughout the city. The red color allowed scientists to visually identify where the bacteria had landed. This provided valuable data on the simulated attack's reach. The experiment involved spraying large quantities of the bacterial agent. This was done from naval vessels positioned offshore. The prevailing winds were intended to carry the aerosolized bacteria over the city. The operation lasted for several days. Multiple releases were conducted to gather comprehensive data. The scale of the release was significant, covering a large portion of the metropolitan area. Government scientists monitored the spread using various methods. They collected air samples and surface samples across San Francisco. This data was then analyzed to map the bacteria's trajectory and concentration. The results provided insights into how quickly and widely an airborne agent could disperse. This information was intended to inform strategies for defense and response to a real biological attack. The focus was purely on the military implications. The ethical implications of using a civilian population as unwitting test subjects were seemingly overlooked or dismissed. The perceived urgency of Cold War defense preparedness took precedence. Secrecy was paramount to the operation's execution. The Navy compiled detailed reports on the findings. These reports documented the dispersal patterns and concentrations observed. The data gathered was considered highly valuable for biological warfare defense research. The operation was classified at the highest levels. Knowledge of the experiment was restricted to a small group of military and government officials. The public remained completely unaware of what had transpired. The use of Serratia marcescens was based on the scientific understanding of the time. It was widely considered a relatively harmless simulant. This belief, however, would later prove tragically incorrect for some individuals. The experiment highlighted the military's intense focus on preparedness. It demonstrated the lengths to which the government would go to understand potential threats. The line between research and reckless endangerment became blurred. The data collected from Operation Sea Spray was integrated into military planning. It influenced strategies for detecting and responding to biological attacks. The insights gained were considered vital for national security. However, the human cost and ethical breach remained hidden. The focus was solely on the technical and military aspects of the simulation. The well-being and rights of the citizens were not prioritized. The operation proceeded without any public health consultation or oversight. It was conducted purely as a military exercise. The potential health impacts on the population were not adequately assessed beforehand. The decision to use a live, albeit supposedly harmless bacterium, was controversial even within some scientific circles later on. However, at the time, the perceived need for realistic simulation outweighed caution. The Cold War climate fostered an environment of extreme measures. Following the bacterial release, residents of San Francisco began experiencing unusual illnesses. A range of different illnesses were reported across the city. These included various types of infections. Among the reported illnesses were urinary tract infections. There was also an increase in cases of pneumonia. Other respiratory issues and infections were noted by local health officials. At the time, the government initially dismissed these reported illnesses. They were publicly attributed to common seasonal outbreaks or other unrelated causes. The illnesses were initially called coincidental and unrelated to any specific event. Local doctors and hospitals observed the uptick in certain infections. However, they had no knowledge of the secret military experiment. The true cause remained hidden from the medical community. Decades later, through the process of declassification, documents confirmed the link. These government documents revealed the truth about Operation Sea Spray. They confirmed the direct link between the bacterial release and the subsequent outbreak of infections. The declassified information exposed the tragic consequences of the experiment. It became clear that the Serratia marcescens bacteria was not as harmless as initially believed. For some individuals, it proved to be pathogenic. Tragically, at least one individual was confirmed to have died. This death was determined to be a direct result of the experiment. The individual succumbed to an infection caused by the released bacteria. Many others across the city also got sick. While not fatal for everyone, the infections caused significant suffering and required medical treatment. The true number of affected individuals may never be fully known. The revelation of the link between the experiment and the illnesses was shocking. It exposed the severe human cost of the covert operation. The government's initial denial compounded the ethical failure. The use of a live bacterium, even one considered low risk, proved to be a critical error. The vulnerability of certain populations, such as the elderly or those with compromised immune systems, was not adequately considered. The experiment demonstrated a profound disregard for public safety. The illnesses caused by Serratia marcescens can be severe. While often treatable, they can lead to serious complications, especially in vulnerable individuals. The experiment turned a city into an unwitting testbed for a potentially harmful agent. The long-term health impacts on the wider population remain a subject of concern. While acute infections were documented, the possibility of other subtle effects is difficult to ascertain decades later. The lack of informed consent makes any follow-up study ethically complex. The incident highlighted the dangers of conducting secret experiments on civilian populations. It demonstrated the potential for unforeseen and harmful consequences. The belief that the bacteria was harmless was a critical misjudgment. The death and illnesses caused by Operation Sea Spray stand as a stark reminder. They underscore the importance of rigorous ethical review and transparency in scientific research, especially when that research involves human populations. The government's failure to acknowledge the link for so long further eroded public trust. It created a sense of betrayal among the affected population and the wider public. The truth remained buried for decades. The declassification process brought this dark episode to light. It allowed for a re-evaluation of the events and their impact. The human cost of the Cold War anxieties became painfully clear. The victims of Operation Sea Spray were never compensated or formally acknowledged by the government for many years. Their suffering was initially dismissed as unrelated coincidence. This added insult to injury. The incident serves as a cautionary tale about the potential misuse of scientific research. It illustrates how national security concerns can sometimes override fundamental ethical principles. The balance between security and individual rights was severely skewed. The Serratia marcescens bacteria is now recognized as an opportunistic pathogen. It is known to cause infections, particularly in hospital settings or in individuals with weakened immune systems. The understanding of its risks has evolved significantly since 1950. The experiment in San Francisco exposed a large, diverse population to this agent. It demonstrated that even a bacterium considered low risk could have serious consequences. The definition of harmless was tragically redefined for some. The legacy of the illnesses caused by Operation Sea Spray persists. It is a reminder of the hidden dangers that can arise from secret government programs. The health impacts were a direct consequence of the covert release. The suffering endured by those who fell ill was a direct result of being unwitting participants. They had no opportunity to protect themselves or seek timely treatment based on the true cause. The secrecy compounded the harm. The incident underscores the critical need for transparency in any research involving potential public exposure. It highlights the ethical imperative of informed consent. These principles were fundamentally violated during Operation Sea Spray. The illnesses and the tragic death were not mere coincidences. They were direct outcomes of a deliberate action. The government's experiment had tangible and harmful effects on the population it was meant to protect. The eventual revelation of Operation Sea Spray sparked widespread outrage. When the declassified documents came to light, the public reacted strongly. There was significant anger and disbelief. The disclosure raised serious ethical questions about government actions. People questioned the morality of using citizens as test subjects without their knowledge. The fundamental principles of human rights were seen as violated. The incident highlighted significant issues of government overreach. It demonstrated how national security objectives could lead to actions that infringed upon individual liberties. The balance of power between the state and its citizens was scrutinized. The revelation also brought to the forefront the violation of citizens' rights. The right to safety, the right to informed consent, and the right to be free from secret experimentation were all breached. The trust between the government and the governed was severely damaged. Legal challenges and investigations followed the declassification. Lawsuits were filed against the government seeking accountability and compensation. The victims and their families sought justice for the harm caused. Congressional hearings were held to investigate the details of Operation Sea Spray. Lawmakers questioned the rationale and ethics of the experiment. The need for greater oversight of military and scientific programs was emphasized. The incident contributed to increased public skepticism regarding government secrecy. It fueled demands for greater transparency in military and scientific research. The public wanted assurance that such experiments would not happen again. Operation Sea Spray became a case study in bioethics and government accountability. It is frequently cited in discussions about the responsible conduct of research. The need for independent ethical review boards was reinforced. The military revised its protocols regarding the use of simulants in testing. Greater caution and stricter ethical guidelines were implemented. The lessons learned from the negative consequences were incorporated into future planning. However, the damage to public trust was lasting. The knowledge that the government had secretly experimented on its own people left a deep scar. It raised concerns about what other secrets might still be hidden. The story of Operation Sea Spray serves as a powerful historical example. It illustrates the potential dangers when scientific ambition and national security concerns are pursued without adequate ethical constraints. The rights and safety of citizens must remain paramount. The legacy of the operation continues to be discussed in academic and public forums. It is a reminder of a time when the lines of acceptable government conduct were crossed. The event remains a dark stain on the history of U.S. government actions. The victims and their stories are a crucial part of this history. Their suffering brought the abstract ethical questions into sharp human focus. Their experiences underscore the real-world consequences of such experiments. Operation Sea Spray stands as a testament to the importance of vigilance. It highlights the need for citizens to be aware of government activities conducted in their name. Transparency and accountability are essential safeguards against future abuses. The incident prompted a re-evaluation of the relationship between the military, science, and the public. It underscored the need for robust civilian oversight of potentially harmful research. The lessons learned continue to inform ethical guidelines today. The story of the secret poisoning of San Francisco is a stark reminder. It shows that even in the pursuit of national security, fundamental human rights must never be compromised. The truth, though delayed, eventually emerged, revealing a disturbing chapter in history.